Hello everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your patience while we figured out how the projector works. I'm Jeff McMahon. I teach journalism and creative and academic writing here. Several years ago, when my colleagues in the committee on creative writing, Dan Rayburn and Kate Soto, invited me to invite some emerging writers here, I seized the chance, of course, but I wasn't sure that my own personal universe of readings was large enough to make just the right selections, especially of writers who are emerging. So I queried friends of mine from coast to coast, writers and teachers of writing, and asked them who, in their opinion, were the best emerging writers in the country. One of those friends was my editor at Forbes, Coach Bateman, who had previously been a book editor at Doubleday and Nanny Talese before sort of plunging into the cutting edge of digital media at AOL and TrueSlant and now Forbes. Coach wrote me back with a single name, Joshuah Bearman. I queried Coates in particular because of the breadth of his experience in both old publishing and new publishing. He straddled and then leapt across the changes in publishing that have really roiled the world of writing in the last 20 years. And I don't just mean the switch from paper to digital media, the switch from mechanical to digital reproduction of copies, but also the underlying changes that must necessarily follow, changes in notions of authorship and ownership and originality. So I think a lot of universities and creative writing programs and English departments need to catch up on some of these changes and the effects they may have on language and literature and creativity. So I've been looking for emerging writers who can teach us more about the new world that we're writing for. So in addition to his creative and journalistic nonfiction, which is brilliant and clever and quirky and cinematic, I was intrigued by Joshua's blog, where he curates oddities that he finds on the internet, like videos of astronauts falling down on the moon, or a random detail from Bruegel's depiction of the Vice of Sloth, in which there seems to be a melancholy fairy pillow party, or links to other blogs like Data is Nature, which explores interrelationships between natural processes, computational systems, and procedural-based art practices. It seems to me that this is part of a writer's job in this new age, where we have to acknowledge that ideas are often not new and not exclusively ours, and not emergent from some secret genius that's inside the brain or that's fed by muses, but rather that ideas come through a network in which we're all participants, a vast dynamic exchange of words and images and ideas. Joshuah Bearman does this from Los Angeles. He covered politics, culture, and science as a staff writer for the LA Weekly. He also writes for Rolling Stone, Wired, Harper's, McSweeneys, and is a contributor to This American Life. His written stories about international cat burglars, aspiring Fabios, deranged private detectives, real-life superheroes, the world's greatest Pac-Man player, and the quirky CIA mission to rescue Americans held hostage in Iran during the Iranian Revolution. That story in Wired became the Ben Affleck movie Argo, which is currently in theaters. And he covered the election on Tuesday, so when we get the chance, we should ask him about that. Joshuah Bearman.
Thanks for the introduction. That was pretty good. I have to remember all that. I had forgotten about the astronauts falling over on the moon. That's a good one. I had to go back to them and be like, yeah, right, that was funny. Okay, so I'm glad to be here. I hope I can be illuminating for everyone heading out into the world of writing, which is a scary place, but hopefully it'll be encouraging. But before, speaking of people heading out into the world of writing, I think we're going to introduce, right now the stage is to introduce Emma, who wrote this wonderful recollection about her father. It's very tough. I'm actually in the middle of writing a memoir about my mother, and I know it's very hard to... My mom... Sorry. my mom recently died, so it's going to be very hard. I'm supposed to read from this book today. Sorry. Thanks for being patient. So before I cry reading about my mother, hopefully Emma will be fine. She will be. I'm going to read about some real life superheroes which will make me laugh. So please welcome Emma.
This is a piece that I've been working on for about a year, and it's about my father who passed away 2 years ago yesterday. It's called Portrait of the Artist, Where I Come From. I found Danny, Gretchen said with a short laugh. We were cleaning out my dad's loft, and my older half-sister had been sifting through the pie safe, a ventilated cupboard we used instead for linen storage, when she spoke up. Her tone was strained. I pretended I didn't hear her, but later I silently opened the pie safe and saw the neat box perched on the bottom shelf, remains of Danny Dries. Remains is a curious word, all that's left, as if he's departed and only left this. At the time, I only looked at the box for a beat or two, then quickly closed the pie safe and left the room. It took me nearly 9 months to bring up the ashes with Mom, to ask her what we were planning to do with them. And when I finally did, when we finally talked about them, we didn't know what to say. They're heavy, she said, and then said nothing more. Dad's art breathed in a way that his ashes didn't. I didn't want to talk about the ashes, to think about them, to see them. But I didn't run from the art. We all craved to be around it. Because of this, throwing out the art was never an option, never considered. Even after we lost Dad and lost his loft, we still had his paintings. Mom opted for the pricier art movers on a recommendation from a friend, and one day in early April, we trucked the art out of Manhattan to a dilapidated studio in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Young potters, art students, and MFA grads would pass by our space curiously. Their studios were naked compared to ours. When they stopped inside, they were intrigued but overwhelmed. They heard our story, Dad's story. They looked at the crate of sketches and stacked paintings, and for the first time, began to understand what a lifetime of art looked like. Here's a lifetime. Dad was born surrounded and died alone. In the tiny town of Sibley, Iowa, Mabel and Frank Dries had 15 children over 20 years, but never saw their last few grow up. Dad was born in 1941, and unlike me, he knew death as a child. His sister Norma had died as a teen from kidney disease. Donald, born 2 years after my dad, lived for just 9 months before succumbing to pneumonia. Then Frank died when Dad was 11, Mabel just 4 years later. After Dad's parents passed, his eldest sister Madonna raised him. At 17, after pushing through high school with mediocre grades, he decided to follow in his brother's footsteps and escape the dead-end realities of post-adolescence in Sibley. He tried to join the military, choosing the Air Force because he liked their uniforms, but the officer told him to go home. Dad had a heart murmur. So because they wouldn't let him be a fighter pilot, he went to art school. My sister Sabella's husband, Barney, could draw real well, Dad said once. He was a total conservative, but a gentle man, and he could draw Dick Tracy like crazy. In the 1940s, matchbooks came with Draw Me games, challenges to sketch Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or Dick Tracy. Though meant to be pastimes for bored children at dinner parties, these matchbooks were a font of entertainment for Barney. When he was a teenager, Dad would sit at the kitchen table and watch Barney sketch the contours of Tracy's square jaw, seeing the admirable detective jump out of the stark white page little by little. Dad had been smoking and drinking since his pre-adolescence, but soon his fingers, which used to solely itch and scramble for the 20-cent pack of Lucky Strikes, started to crave the smooth grip of a pencil. So Dad went to art school and Dad became an artist. He moved to New York in the early 80s. He had an MFA from Pratt and was already a divorcee with twin toddlers. His New York niche and the home I lived in my entire childhood was the third-floor walk-up on South Street in Lower Manhattan. He moved in when the loft was nothing more than gutted floor space, and so we built some walls and began pulling furniture off the street. He met my mom in the mid-80s, and Mom wanted kids. He already had 2, and that was enough, he said, but Mom persisted. Kate was born in '88, they married at City Hall the year after, and I came along 3 years later. Dad's New York life became his new life. It was a rebirth. By the time he was 40, he had lived all over the Midwest and New England. He even spent 2 years studying art in Rome. But he would live far longer on the 3rd floor of 115 South Street than he had anywhere else. It was his first and only New York home. Once Dad found the loft, he stayed put. If we think in reverse, it's doubtful that he would have ever made it to New York had he been allowed to enlist in the Air Force. It's doubtful he would have fallen into art. He followed his older brothers to the army, and it's likely he would have followed them afterwards. Treading in the worn footsteps of his siblings, Dad may have never left the Midwest. In many ways, the walls of our loft became lined with the paintings and sculptures of my father's heart defect. South Street, the eastern boundary of the historical district in Manhattan itself, runs along the East River. Out of the front window of our loft, we could see the Brooklyn Bridge and the tan buildings of Brooklyn Heights and Dumbo. Historical district regulations prohibit developers from building above 8 stories or paving the streets, so our neighborhood was an outlier in downtown Manhattan. In the foreground of slim financial district skyscrapers, the historical district sits rife with squat brick buildings and narrow streets that must be re-cobblestoned every 5 years. We were 2 blocks from the South Street Seaport and directly above the Fulton Fish Market. On weekdays, the fishmongers would hop on their forklifts at 2 a.m. and work until morning, and in wintertime, they would set fire to newspaper and trash cans just to stay warm. On our way to school in the morning, we would open the front door only to be met by stacks of tuna blocking our way. Our block smelled awful to anyone who came to visit, but to us, it was home. While I was growing up, Dad was always in his studio. I was a relentlessly attention-seeking child, but my pestering rarely bothered him. Sometimes I would wander into his studio on Saturday afternoons, and he'd tell me to come back with slippers so I didn't get splinters of wood lodged in my feet. He'd pull a smock over my head, perch me on a stool at his workbench, and help me fill in the lines and shapes of his paintings with color. He would scrawl "with Emma" onto the back of the wood along with the title, claiming a finished painting to be a collaboration even if I'd only painted 2 or 3 brushstrokes. His studio was his sanctuary, but time in it could be as much ours as it was his. Dad's philosophy towards his canvases matched his philosophy towards much of our furniture. If it was good enough for the street, it was good enough for him. So what others threw out, Dad gathered: worn couches, rickety desk chairs, and most importantly, anything paint would stick to. This meant sanded 2x4s and broken tabletops. After clearing construction sites, workers would often leave behind large cable reels. Dad unscrewed the tops of the spools and created an entire Tondo painting series. It was difficult to differentiate between Dad's art and the space he lived in. They bled together quite literally. Dabs and smudges of paint covered the entire studio, and his art surrounded the loft like a colorful exoskeleton. Like most lofts, ours had barely any enclosed rooms, and one wall was nothing more than a variety of tall paintings stacked against one another, scraping the 9-foot ceiling. As we were sorting through Dad's possessions, Mom tried to get rid of a stool from the studio, but my half-brother Aaron resisted. The stool was splattered with cool blues and greens. How could she tell it wasn't meant to be art, he asked. We couldn't throw out any of the art. Eventually, we had to talk about the ashes again. The question of what would be done with them hung in the air until this past spring when I was making plans to spend the summer interning in Los Angeles. I decided to drive out from Chicago, enlisted the company of Kate and Gretchen, and a cross-country sisters road trip was born. We planned to hit up the Grand Canyon for a day, and Kate threw out the idea of scattering the ashes there. Dad didn't have a particularly strong attachment to the canyon. He did love the Southwest, even grumpily threatening to leave New York once or twice for New Mexico. But more than there being a particularly strong reason for laying him to rest there was no strong reason not to. It had been over a year, and honestly, what could be more beautiful? There were awkward proceedings. Could we even scatter them there? Kate, not exactly a risk taker, was sure it was against the law and was reticent, despite remembering how Nana snuck Papa's ashes into the rose garden at the Huntington Library in a series of Ziploc baggies. I rooted around the National Park's website and managed to decipher that the scattering of remains was legal as long as we were 25 feet from any structure or landmark. So Dad's ashes trundled along with us in the back of our Mazda 3 through rich, flat green of Nebraska, the carved red rock of Colorado, and finally the dusty pallor of northern Arizona. At sunset of our first and only day at the Grand Canyon, we scattered the ashes off a secluded outlook. Some fell against the rock we stood on, white against a grayer canyon dust, while the rest blew softly down the steep slope and out of sight. Gretchen pulled up some Bob Dylan on her iPhone and began to cry. Kate stood a ways back from the edge and took photos of the landscape. I sat on the rim and watched the sun dip below the horizon, the canyon falling into heavier and darker shadows. And that was it. We kept some of the ashes. Aaron wasn't there with us, and we weren't sure we wanted to part with all of Dad just yet. But it felt, for the most part, like a semblance of closure. It felt like what you should do for closure. It felt, for lack of a better word, appropriate. But really, there was nothing life-altering about the experience. No real catharsis in feeling the weight fall out of my hands, of watching the ash scatter at my feet. See, here's the thing. I feel nothing in looking at the pale, white, fragment-ridden, chalky dusk that I can't feel 100 times stronger when looking at his even most rudimentary watercolors. Because Dad is gone, and Dad is art, not ash. These days, though, Dad's art is beginning to feel like less of a solace. In an ideal world, we would keep it all forever. And it seems unfair that the most lifeless part of my father could be quite literally packaged up in a small, neat box and parted with just as neatly. It seems unfair that there was time and energy and opportunity available to literally say goodbye to the remains of someone I don't even believe can hear me anymore, but that we all seem at a loss for finding out a way to approach the art. On the one hand, the logistics are too complicated. None of us truly have adequate time or money to market him into post-mortem recognition. On the other hand, perhaps there's a germ of doubt in all of us. What if we do it, we truly put him out there, and nobody sees what we do? Nobody sees the beauty, the genius, the legacy. What then? A week after Dad died, we held what we called a gathering at the loft. He would have hated a stuffy memorial service. We crowded awkwardly near the front windows and traded stories, and we laughed more than we cried. Afterward, a cousin stopped me in the hallway, pausing to lay a hand on a small painting rife with soft and cool colors. I'd never met her before, but this didn't surprise me. She is one of 42 first cousins on my dad's side. "This one," my cousin said. She nodded to the painting. He told me he wanted to give me this one. I looked at the painting. Blue and green was my favorite, but that wall also held Bouquet and Kuwait 91, Everybody's Mona Lisa, Portrait of the Artist, Where I Come From, and countless more. They are all my favorites. I didn't want to let go of any of them. I gave her a small smile. We'll see. In its new Brooklyn home, the art looks different than it did in the loft. It smells the same, though, like dust and oil paints and worn wood and Dad. We won't be able to afford this space much longer. More things I don't want to think about. Instead, I think of Saturday afternoons spent painting with my father. Before he died, but also before the loft stopped feeling like home and before Dad stopped feeling like a parent. Before I lost both. But that is another story. Before I leave the studio, I pull the windows shut tight to keep the smell in.
I'm fine. No, really, that was lovely. And what I meant when I said it's like hard to write about that sort of thing is actually not that it's hard to write about it and not cry, although I have discovered that, but is how to write about it and avoid, the kind of, the sentimentality of the moment, and like take a step back and consider what these things mean and avoid cliche essentially. And so I thought you did a really nice job writing about that. What is this part of a larger?
It's selections from sort of a larger piece I'm working on about him as a person.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice thought too. Also, the idea of the person is the works. I thought that was really nice. Okay, so I have, all right. So I'm a journalist mostly. I'm also writing a memoir. So mostly I write magazine stories, and then now I'm writing a book about, well, I was writing a book about my mother, and then she died in the middle of it. And and actually this is the first time I was planning on reading from it tonight, which is why I'm kind of terrified. So, and because I haven't read anything from this book almost ever, and certainly not since she died. So I will probably get to that, but first I'm going to I have a Audiovisual Extravaganza that we were setting up, which is just kind of like slides from some of my stories and characters and whatnot, which I thought I'll kind of go through, and then I'll read a couple of things from some of those stories. I actually gave a lecture with that title a while ago, and I stand by it. I believe it. I mean, magazine stories I think are very often, it's like the cover of Wired is like, what's the future of mind control or whatever, right? Like kind of a topic or a trend story or something. But like my favorite kinds are the narrative pieces where I love the future of mind control as well, as much as the next guy. But and I've done those stories too. But I love the narrative stories that are sort of like based on you find some crazy character or a weird setting or a world or whatever it is. And so I have just a couple, here's some of so that's what I do, is I find these characters and I kind of spend a lot of time with them and write what I hope to kind of be sort of almost, like fiction, but of nonfiction. So here's some of these characters. So this guy is Master Legend. This guy's a real life superhero in Orlando, Florida, and he goes around like that, fighting crime, trying to make the world a better place. And I don't know, this was in Rolling Stone a few years ago, and Master Legend is has actually managed to successfully create this sort of homespun crime fighting practice. And he's got his sidekick, he's got a series of sidekicks, and he's got his Justice Force kind of crime fighting team. And he is sort of down and out himself. So actually, to be honest, Master Legend kind of gets to me sometimes too, because he's such a sweetheart, even though he's like always like, I'm gonna kick some ass, but he's really a sweetheart. Let me see what the next one is. Oh yeah, okay, so this is Billy Mitchell. This is the world's greatest Pac-Man player. And also, has anybody seen the documentary King of Kong? Yeah. Everybody knows, right? So I also worked on that documentary because I had spent a lot of time with this guy. And he also is, as you know from the documentary, he actually is the best Donkey Kong player, by the way, as a technical matter. Despite all the confusing folds of the narrative, I think he actually is the better player. Let's see what the next one. Okay. Well, this is I went to this. This is a good one actually, because there was no specific story. I just heard that there was a competition called MrRomance, where a bunch of dudes compete to be on the cover of the next Harlequin novel. And so I just showed up there and was like, that'll be awesome. And sure enough, I wrote a piece. It was actually for GQ, and then it got killed unceremoniously. And so I started writing for McSweeneys, and so McSweeneys is kind of like this do-it-yourself. McSweeneys is like what was like print internet in like 1999, because Dave was just like, we could just do whatever we want. We don't need the system. We're gonna just make our own things. And so, and which is true. And as now he's continues to do that in this huge empire. But so in essence, I sort of love the spirit of it, where what GQ was the editor at GQ is this guy named Jim Nelson, who is sort of like this deity, or believed to be a deity amongst the people in there. So you can't even go in his inner sanctum you have to walk in backwards, and then you look up. And so my editor just couldn't ever, I think I saw Jim Nelson at cocktail parties more than my editor did. And so they never end a story, so I emailed it to Dave, and the next day he's like, we're running this, at full length. And so that was very exciting. So that's just a story to the power of being able to publish outside of the system. The story was wildly entertaining, and I just sort of made a story out of a weird, crazy setting. So now what I'm gonna do is well, let's just leave CJ. This guy's name is CJ here, CJ Hollenbach. He is but just FYI, in case you're wondering what his deal is, he's a cover model. And his Christmas special is coming down here. But he had been in MrRomance. He had been a winner in 1994. He's a little long in the tooth. He tries to hide it. But when I was there, he was there's a mentor to the young whippersnappers, much like what is happening here. Yeah, and so he was wearing these, he wasn't wearing that little thing, he actually was wearing these awesome kind of leather sew-up pants that all of his whole outfit had been made by fans, because it's these Midwestern ladies that sew leather into boots and stuff, and send it to him. So in any case, so what I'm gonna read really quick is just a selection from the story about Master Legend. Here, maybe let's go back to Master Legend. You could go the other route. Yeah, okay, we'll go back, one more. Okay. So this is from Rolling Stone, and I'm gonna just kind of jump in the middle like a fun little section, and if I have to explain something, I'll just explain it. Yeah, I got enough. It is illuminated from inside. Saving the world, of course, requires personal sacrifice. Few real-life superheroes have families. And those with women in their lives often find that their higher calling can cause rifts. Master Legend has seen a lot of relationships go sour, starting with his wife, who divorced him 10 years ago. She never believed in what I did, he says. And he actually kind of does talk like this. Then there was his last girlfriend. She left because she wanted to sit around the couch and hold hands all day. Well, that's not in the cards for Master Legend. Another casualty of the superhero lifestyle is career advancement. Unlike Peter Parker, Master Legend has no cover job. He can't hold down a 9-to-5, he says, because a life on the precipice of action means always being able to answer the call. I'll walk right out the door if someone needs me, he says with a laugh. 3 years of trade school exposed Master Legend to electronics, welding, and other skills he drew on while dabbling in odd jobs over the years. Shrimp fishing, tree trimming, roofing, and salvage work. Lately, he's been working as an assistant to elderly people. Here again, Master Legend finds himself locked in a battle between good and evil. All these people are waiting to kick out the old folks. Put them in the old folks' home, he says, working himself up with indignation. But as long as I'm here, they can't, and they hate me for that. For Master Legend, it's all just another type of superheroing. There are just two sides of my life, which is really one side, he says. And that's the side of making things right. The ace tells me about his conversation. The ace is his sidekick. The ace tells me about his conversion to the cause one night as we fetched some Chinese takeout to bring back to the secret hideout. Master Legend, by the way, can't come with us. This is parenthetical because he still won't remove his mask in my presence, and so then he can't go into a store because it's illegal. You can't just walk into a store with a mask. So I met Master Legend a long time ago, the ace says. They hit it off at a party, bonding over music, and discovered that they had a lot of mutual friends. Before that, the ace says, I was married, had a good job. The ace made money setting up stage shows, Nickelodeon events, Blue Man Group, that sort of thing. The ace used to be a performer himself. In a surprising digression, he tells me he once led a dance review called Male Factor. This was before Chippendales, he reminds me. Not like they do now with just bump and grind and no imagination. We had choreographers like in Vegas. In fact, we even did Vegas. Movies too. Ever heard of Spring Fever? 1982, starring Susan Anton. Check it out. Susan Anton, by the way, is the drunk mom in Arrested Development. This is when she was like 30. But that was years ago, before the divorce and the brief stint in jail last year. I didn't ask exactly how bad things got for the ace, but eventually his wife's boss moved into his house, and he moved in with Master Legend. That's when I got sucked into the whole Justice Force thing, he says. He'd helped Master Legend before, but at a distance and never in costume. I was getting more and more involved. Then ML got me a mask and convinced me to put it on, and that's when I saw the light. It's a powerful thing. Late last year, when the ace made his first public appearance, he worried what other people might think. But in the protective warmth of the costume, he says, the fear is quickly overcome. There's the flawed you and the good you, he says, striking a philosophical note. And this, he holds up the mask, gives us the chance to make up for our flaws. The windows are rolled down, letting in the sound of cicadas from the dark stand of trees across the empty parking lot. I know it sounds silly, he says, but once you change someone else's life, even in a small way, it makes you realize you can change things in your own life. That's a nice thought. I could read another little section. You guys want to hear any little more about Master Legend? There's like a super quick section here. The next one. Okay, I'm going to do it. Wait a second. Is it as short as I thought? Yeah, it is. Okay, back at the secret hideout, we laid the Chinese feast out on the table. A friend stops by for a quick conversation with Master Legend. It is dusk, and I watch two silhouettes against the twilight out on the porch conferring quietly. That was the Black Panther, Master Legend says, when the friend leaves. The Black Panther doesn't want to get caught up with the press, so Master Legend didn't introduce him to me, but make no mistake, Black Panther is a Justice Force fellow traveler. Besides sometimes jamming with the band, Master Legend has a band also called the Justice Force. And he plays guitar, and Ace plays the drums. And then they sing songs. Besides sometimes jamming with his band, the Black Panther is known to introduce a reggae vibe. He helps out on a mission. He helps out on missions. Not too long ago, Black Panther told Master Legend about a local family that was having financial trouble and was in danger of being evicted. So Master Legend helped raise money to cover their rent. Sometimes that's all people need, he says, a little boost. This generous spirit is what so impresses the ace about Master Legend. He'll buy a neighbor groceries if they're between checks, the ace says. He'd give a guy his last $1. I've only known Master Legend a short time, but I've noticed that people are always coming by or calling, seeking his advice and help. One of his neighbors even sends his son over to the secret hideout for guidance, which he gets in the form of Master Legend's boundless optimism and personal training in the Way of the Diamond Spirit. The Way of the Diamond Spirit is Master Legend's own martial arts variety. That's what he calls it. He calls it the Way of the Diamond Spirit, which is a pretty good name, actually, for if you're going to come up with your own martial arts. That's a pretty good one. One day last year, Fire Fire's another one of the Justice Force dudes. He's part of a duo, Fire and Brimstone. Fire alerted Master Legend to a controversial freeway extension up near Apopka where the state was clashing with activists over the plight of the gopher tortoises living on the site. I couldn't believe it, Master Legend says. These are beautiful prehistoric creatures, and they wanted to bury them alive with cement. It's crazy, but that's the way of the world. That's why the world needs us. The Justice Force joined the protest, costumes and all, and the state was forced to relocate the tortoises. That was a great mission, Master Legend says. Those tortoises are the nicest little guys you'd ever want to meet. They look like living cartoons just eating their lettuce. They're adorable. It's true, they do look like that. But nothing is more satisfying to Master Legend than helping those who are less fortunate. On their last big Christmas mission, he and the ace filled the battle truck with supplies they bought, having pooled funds from the Justice Force, and headed to Skid Row. When they arrived, they were mobbed. Master Legend reckons that they gave something to every single homeless person in Orlando. Toothbrushes, razors, soap, blankets, canned goods, cigarettes, candy. When the bags were empty, he and the ace headed back to the secret hideout to celebrate with a few beers. That's what all of his missions end with him and the ace, like drinking some thirst quenchers. It's always about like tall and foamies and thirst quenchers. We aren't that much better off than the people who are helping the ace notes, gesturing to the squalor of the hideout. Neither Master Legend nor the ace received any Christmas gifts themselves. But neither of them is complaining. A lot of people talk about doing right by other people, says the ace, but what are they really doing? All right, so that's Master Legend. Okay, so I can also, I don't know how much time we have. I could just, I could read like one more. I could read my short selection from my book. It's very short, actually. Should I just do that? Yeah. Okay. And then, if you really want, I could do a super quick run through some of these pictures if you're interested, or maybe it comes out in the Q&A or something. Okay, so this is, has anybody, okay, so you guys listen to This American Life sometimes? Okay, so there's a story on there. One of them is, I do stories for the show sometimes, and one of them is about my mom and my brother. My mom was a career alcoholic. My brother was an aspiring rapper, and they lived together in a retirement home in Florida. Is this ringing any bells? This was like a few years ago. So that's the basic story, just to explain it. So, and then I had to go down, this little section that we are going to hear, but I gotta find it, is about when my mom, one of the many times that she sort of like wound up in the hospital and I had to go to Florida and like to figure out what had happened. But hold on, I just gotta find it. Okay, here we go. It's kind of funny too, though, so don't get too worried. I know I'm really saying that to myself. When I arrive at Columbia Presbyterian, Mom is unconscious and intubated in the ICU. Delirium tremens already set in. She's not awake much, the watch physician says, but even when she's unconscious, she tries to leave the bed, so we had to restrain her. That sounds about right. When she told the paramedics she was staying right there on the goddamn couch, they threatened to Baker Act her into a county facility. I heard it over the phone, but this doctor knows all about it too, because the paramedics said they never saw anything like it. Not in Century Village, anyhow. They wrote it into her chart. The doctor is a young intern, sympathetic, but disturbed about her condition. By the time she wound up here, he says, she weighed 90 pounds. She had bed sores. Her sugar was 600, close to the threshold for diabetic shock. That she's alive at all, he says, is a testament to the resilience of the survival mechanisms built into the human body. This probably wasn't what a million years of evolution had intended, but here we were. The doctor and I talk a while about her medical history. He says that she had some poorly healed fractures, probably from falls that were never treated. That's what she needs, he says, treatment. You're telling me, I say. Just then, another doctor walks up. I can tell before this guy opens his mouth that he's a prick. Are you the kid, he says, without looking at me? Then he states that my mother would never be the same again. Well, what does that mean, I ask? It's one thing for me to be disappointed in her, and another thing altogether for some doctor to be cavalier after 5 minutes with her chart. Well, he says, flipping through the pages, she's non-communicative, she doesn't know where she is. How do you know she doesn't know where she is if she's non-communicative, I asked. Ah, I see, he says. Looks like we have a savvy medical consumer. Are you her doctor? I'm on watch at the moment, and I can read the scores. This woman was responsible enough at one point to perform very low on the Palmer test. And so, it measures brain function. She scored a 62. Out of what? 100. She's probably permanently neurologically impaired. Although, the nurse points out, people often score low after serious medical problems and then improve. That's true, the first doctor says. The nice one. I took it myself for practice in med school and I got like an 80. No one scores 100 anyhow. Then someone suggests that to get a perfect score, you'd have to be superhuman, fully tapped into all of your faculties. This was a topic that interested the prick of a doctor. You know who could get 100, he says. What's that guy, you know, the one who can do everything, including karate? Leonardo da Vinci, suggests the nurse. No. I mean that speaker guy. I wish I could remember his name. If I was him, I'd never forget anyone's name. He unlocks your personal power so you can realize your full potential. He's like 7 feet tall. Tony Robbins, I say? Exactly. The doctor confirms, breaking what looks like the first smile of his entire life. Now that guy would score 100. The other doctor and the nurse think about this briefly and then agree that, yes, Tony Robbins is the only person on earth who would top out the Palmer test. Behind them, the door to my mother's room is open, and I can see her twisted up in her bed. The white sheet stretched over her like a shroud, making her look like a corpse, except when, every so often, she instinctively fidgets with the straps so as to make an unconscious escape. The three medical professionals are still discussing how awakening the giant within can really improve your neurological assessment testing scores when another nurse comes out of my mother's room and tells me that when they wheeled my mother in here last night, even before she could talk, she managed to convey that she absolutely needed some cigarettes. She kept trying to convince us to take her outside so she could smoke. At one point, she was trying to light a cigarette in her bed. We have no idea where she even got it. And that's when I knew she would be fine.
I say we could just start by, is there anything that he was talking about or reading about that made you curious that you should follow up on?
Can we run through the slideshow? Okay, sure. We'll go real fast. Okay, Nashville legend, Billy Mitchell, CJ. Okay. I did a story in This American Life about a feud between rival factions of professional Santa Clauses. These are the two rivals. Santa Tim, Santa Nick. Did you ever hear this one? Anybody hear this one? That's Santa Tim over there. He's the King Santa, who is like the sort of benevolent dictator of the Santa world. This is the reformer. It's sort of like a parable of revolution, right? Because the reformer comes along and turns into a tyrant himself. And so he was like the Stalin Santa. So that's Nick. And that was a really fun story. Also an investigative thing that turned into this really great narrative. Santa Nick, basically the story was he thought that Santa Tim was buttering his bread on both sides because he would like take a commission on the referrals from the union. And then Santa Nick was like, we need to put a stop to it. And then Santa Nick came along and immediately like excommunicated all the Santas that were on Tim's side, and then he got a hold of the Jingle Press, which is the media, you know, and started attacking all of Santa Tim supporters. Okay, what do we got next? Oh, that's there, look. That's what it looks like in action. This is the Hollywood Christmas Parade. Santa Tim is the Santa of the Hollywood Christmas Parade, which in his mind makes him the best Santa. Okay, there's Billy Mitchell. We see him. This is Walter Day. You guys know him from the documentary, if anybody's seen this documentary. That's the referee. Okay, here's a key thing in the story-wise writing. This is how I discovered this story. As I saw this guy walking around an arcade, which is obvious, like, okay, that's an interesting story. Everybody loves him. He's really tall. It's like he must be sitting down so the perspective is off here. He's like really tall guy. And then he's talking all about like achieving perfection in like Dig Dug or whatever. And the kill screen, which is like when the computer's, like the code runs out and the screen just freezes. This is this thing in classic video game competition. And he was talking all about the end of a certain game, and then Walter comes up, who you can see kind of from his like far off stare. He is a kind of a intense dude, and he's also a dedicated transcendental meditator, and he lives in Fairfield, Iowa, where the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi founded the TM, a whole city of TMers. And he walked up, and he's like, oh yeah, and they're all palsy, and then they're talking about the kill screen, and then he says, oh, the kill screen, they're start talking about Galaga, which is a classic video game, and the kill screen at the end of Galaga is like just your ship, like floating in space with no score, all the scores, everything disappears. And then he was like, yeah, it's sort of all about like contemplating a state of conclusion, you know? And he started getting all metaphysical about it and talking about how it's like understanding a system, and like if you, poetically, it's only on the hardest level of Galaga, if you're playing it, that you get that kill screen where you can just sort of be floating and like be one with the universe of the game, essentially. And so that's when I was like, oh, there's a really interesting story here, and I would spend time with both of those guys. And, you know, so okay, next. The technical ephemera of being a really awesome classic video game player. By the way, this is like his notes from high school, right? He's like just writing. Don't you remember doing this? Just like video games. It's like in your notes, like in 11th grade or whatever. Okay, next. Here's MrRomance. There's CJ. Some lovely covers. These are the actual contestants that I dealt with. This guy won. For obvious reasons. This guy's whole thing was, by the way, he's like, my humor is going to be comedy. And I was like, that is not going to, it's not going to win, buddy. This guy was a total dipshit. This guy was really awesome. His name is Travis. He's pretty handsome, right? He was there with his mom. He's had his actual cowboy hat because he lives on a ranch in like Montana raising horses and golden retrievers with his mom. He like is fucking MrRomance, right? And he's in med school. He did not win. So just think about that, people. Okay. Well, here you go. Here's more Santas. This is just over the years. This is a place in LA that has fake snow on it, where they, of course, like they convene. Maybe they automatically come to it, like in Close Encounters. They just don't even know why they're going there. Okay, next one. Oh, okay. All right, we're running through. Oh, yeah. This is the enforcer Santa on the establishment side. Santa Rick. He's being interviewed on television about it. We don't need to. Oh yeah, this is kind of exciting. This is a still from a video clandestinely recorded at one of the Santa tribunals, where you can see the Santas they're all gathering to kick out the other. This is like a coup in progress. And then Santa Rick, who you just saw on television, this is him filming, and then this is Nick. Santa Nick realizes that fucking Santa Rick is there with the camera. And he's like, you know, okay, so next.
Is it hot? Are they all in their underwear? Is that what you're saying?
Dude, you know what's really funny about that video is, they're in their, they got suspenders and the whole thing. They don't have their full, velvet on, right? But the Santa Rick was being all like coy with his camera, he's like, oh, this camera is maybe on or not, and so there's a lot of I've seen the whole video, and there's a lot of it just like, the camera just like doing this, and you can hear everything that's going on. And then, like, all you can see is striped socks every direction that you're looking. Okay. Master Legend. There's the ace. Boom. This is Master Legend's card. This is the Justice Van. That's what happens when you're a real life superhero in Orlando. Girl with the Jack Daniels bandana just wants to take her picture with you. All right. You can just make any van the Justice Force Special Operations Unit with this handy magnet. I don't even know what it's all about. Okay, I love this. I just love it. I don't even understand how this picture was taken. Okay. Oh, this guy. This is a story I did in Wired about a jewel thief. This is a good one. Well, that's a jewel thief. I mean, come on. Like, look at this. And he was this nerdy little guy, kind of a tech whiz, who sort of realized how he would overcome his socioeconomic and sort of sociability, Aspergian deficiencies in life by exploiting his kind of technical know-how to become a seriously successful bank robber and criminal. Okay, next one. This is his crew. This is my favorite picture I've ever received for doing a story. His name is Gerald on top of it, right? And this guy, listen, this dude, wait, maybe the next slide. Oh yeah, he parachuted onto the roof of this castle and stole the diamond. That was and go back. And the whole thing was to get the girl, right? Okay, next one. That's his girlfriend laying on like 1 million Canadian or euros or whatever they are. So crime does pay, people. Yeah, no, he had this Asian thing and fetish, and he just had all this money. So okay, next one. This is the last thing. We'll save this for the very end. Okay, this is the last part of the slideshow. Okay.
Any other questions?
Do you always write yourself into your stories?
No. Wait. Yes. Not always. Not mostly. I mean, well, like in Master Legend story, like I'm kind of in it a little bit, kind of interjecting like the voice of like the observer, but I'm not really in it like a character. Although in the MrRomance one, that's a good question, because obviously like there's all different ways to do it. Magazine writing, you know, there's all these different kind of modes. There's like I have friends that are staffers at the New Yorker. One of my best friends from school is there now, and he's like me in interest, except he's in the New Yorker, and so it's just like the most just like crystalline like arrangement of facts, you know, that you've ever seen. And like you don't catch a whiff of him at all. In fact, he won't even do interviews about his stories. So that's kind of one way. Or you can be all kind of like whatever, new journalism style, and it's all about you. I kind of am somewhere in the middle. With MrRomance was the most one where it's like I went there and I was like, there's a narrative happening where it's like these ideas of what romance means, right? And like there's this like kind of operatic, kitschy, ridiculous thing going on where there's all these dudes like sashaying around in sexy Viking outfits and like thousands of women all like going crazy for it. And she's like, well, this is meaningless, right? Because it's just kind of it's shtick. It's not. And then I decided like there was meaning. There was a story in there, and like what is it really about? And so I started discovering that. But the purported meaning, by the way, in the romance world, is not just. It's not all just about the like kind of whole beefcake look. You got to have romance IQ, so you have to know what women really want in their hearts, and. No, I'm just kidding. But like, no, that was the whole thing. It's like they said that, but then they didn't. Then they voted for Jason Santiago, who the whole thing was Latin lover, and then the nice guy. The whole thing was like, this is the place where nice guys don't finish last. That's what they said. And so then, as a writer, I started like really. I became like the standard bearer for Travis. Poor Travis, who was not getting any traction, even though he's very clearly like the best candidate. And so I started going around actually in the story. I started like kind of push polling people. Like I'd be like, so who are you going to vote for? And they'd be like, you know, Santiago. And I'd be like, but isn't that Travis just incredible? He's just surrounded by foals and puppies all the time. And he's here with his mom. And they're going camping after this. Can you believe it? So I started really, so in that case, I mean, I very explicitly kind of like took a side to kind of like basically make a point.
And then like, does that make like other journalists, does that make like their hair stand on their arms?
No, because if you're doing, I mean, there's just, you would either kind of write that type of story or not. It's not like, it's not an ethical matter within journalism. It is a matter of style. I think actually, to be honest, I think it is harder to do what my friend Rafi does, which is to stay out of it altogether and still make it just like, sort of like a killer story. And so I think that that's a little bit of a crutch, and you would want to. I try to watch it, you know, but no, I don't think it doesn't bother people. It's also certain types of stories, like a story a feature in GQ is likely going to have the writer in it. I don't know if you guys have ever read George Saunders, right, the short story writer. He also has written. Has anybody seen his stories from GQ? Everybody seen these? Okay, you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay, so GQ, you know George Saunders, right? Of course. This is the most genius idea since, like, you know, Harper sent David Foster Wallace onto the cruise ship you know, inaugurating like the whole new brand of journalism. But they sent George Saunders, they were like, just tell George Saunders to go to Dubai. And be like, what's up with Dubai, right? And then he goes and he just like, and it's all George Saunders, like Dubai is basically like a George Saunders story already. And so he goes and he writes and it's all him and he's like so much into it, you know, like in his personality is like, is the story essentially. So I think, I don't quite do that, but I don't think it bothers people.
What's the time when we have to end?
6, I think.
Okay. Other questions? Curious about, they say that's the most important part about journalism is curiosity.
I just wanted to ask about your election coverage. Like,
Oh.
like,
That was really fun. I actually didn't cover the elections this year, but I did the last 2 elections. It's really fun. It's really different now. I mean, I was 2004. That's how I really started writing as a full-time person, because you could freelance real easy. So I started writing for The Voice and The Weekly. It's real easy to actually do. To just like you can just kind of get a fake little business card and just tell whatever the Obama campaign I'm coming on your bus and like go around Iowa with them. Like in the early days, especially when there's like nobody there. It's really interesting to see like the caucuses or like retail politics up close. It's a little bit less interesting to sort of just be like in the spin zone room after the debates where like a lot of the big media, you'll see like Brian Williams and all that. It's a little bit exciting for like a second. But it's like, it's a really fun, it's a really fun process. Also because you're like with this little community, it's like being in camp, but it's like roaming because you like form these bonds with the other journalists. You ever read Boys on the Bus? There's a famous book about the people covering the campaign. And it's a little bit like that. You know, it's like in camp where you decide like, I like that guy, or no, I don't like that guy. You know, like there's like a little personalities that are changing over the course of the campaign and stuff, but it's really fun. But it's totally irrelevant what I did. I used to write like dispatches, which were the best. It was like still pretty fast. Like, you know, you'd stay up till 2 in the morning writing like, I just ran into this crazy dude and this is the story. But like now, by the time you put, and it's like irrelevant. Like I actually don't even know how campaigns are covered on the ground anymore. I have no idea because it's all so fast now.
You were introduced and you mentioned your blog. And
Yeah.
I feel like blogging is really interesting for journalists because your background seems to be like poring over your work and really like spending time with it to craft this like sensation and story. Like, is your blog more than just like nuggets of internet fun? And how do you bridge that gap into like immediacy?
Yeah, it started as more like actual writing and campaign stuff and just like, oh, I'm gonna write a little essay about whatever. And now it is a little bit more just like, you know, that Photoshop of Obama, like the Prince cover with Obama's face or whatever. Like just like, it's like things that are like a little indulgences basically. Because I like my writing has changed where I like actually get so deeply immersed in something for like an extended period that I like kind of don't break. I probably should more actually, because it is really fun. Like once you, and it's effective because you kind of like practice. You know, you work things through when you're writing really fast, and I go back and look at things that I've written and be like, oh, that's really good, and I'll kind of draw from that. But to some extent also, because like if you have an omnivorous taste too, right, in terms of like topically, you can't really pursue every story. So to have a place to indulge your sort of little interest for a quick second, and then forget all about it as I do, is really helpful, I think. Do you have a blog? Is that what you're asking?
No, I don't, and I haven't been able to because I feel like I went to school for journalism and I write a lot, but it's usually for like a thing. And like the ease of blogging has always been like, weirdly overwhelming to me, and I just wonder if like...
I know what you mean. Sometimes I get like that too. I'm like, oh God, I gotta write something about this, you know, like even just a short thing. But but it is very helpful. Actually, if you get into rhythm, I find it really helpful. I actually now write so much less than I did when I was younger, and it's not because I don't want to, it's because I kind of got out of the habit because I'm always gearing up for some big like 10,000 word story, you know, as opposed to writing like, you know, this awesome 600 word little thing. And you think things through that way. You like think about what you decide what you make of the thing you're posting about, and then I think it's actually very helpful. Oh, sorry.
Do you think that having a blog is important for aspiring journalists?
Some kind of digital presence is important. It's not vital. I have a lot of friends who, I have some friends, it's like kind of interesting, who are kind of really serious magazine journalists that don't engage in that at all, but are hugely successful. Maybe because they are so focused, I don't know. But I think I feel like it's helpful, but I don't really know why, actually, come to think of it. It's like maybe because it's like the best thing you can learn in general about writing stuff, as you probably know, is like already it's like you kind of have to like, it all happens partly because of luck, and like you met somebody at the cocktail party who's like friends with the so-and-so, and like that's how my first piece was the Billy Mitchell piece, and that was the Harper's story, and that was because I had audited a class that Lawrence Weschler taught at Columbia, and he was kind of, and he's a Harper's New Yorker and then Harper's person, and so he was like, you should go talk to this guy, and he vouched for me in a way that I could go into Harper's, and I didn't even have a pitch. I was like, I don't know, I got this idea about, like, it was the opposite of what they tell you in school, where like you have to know exactly what you're telling them and pitching, and I just got lucky because of that connection. I wound up with an agent without, I didn't really have a book idea. Well, what happens is when you have like a magazine story, like some of these stories, like, oh, you get approached by publishers and like, you could turn that into a book, you know? And then I'm like, I don't want to talk to Master Legend ever again. Which actually turned out to not be true, because actually that story was optioned by HBO to be made into a series. So then I've spent a lot of time with Master Legend. But so that kind of forced me to like think about agents, and I was approached by a couple, I think for the same way, where it's like they would read a story and be like, oh, you should think about me helping you write that, you know, take that as a book proposal or whatever. And then I didn't really pursue it very much until I actually had an idea for a book, which was this memoir that grew out of this American Life story. But I like talked to a lot of agents before that. If anybody ever contacted me, that is also my thing. I'll be like, sure, like, I want to hear what you're thinking and whatever. And then, because you never know that person, even though, and a lot of them were very junior agents at that time. And so then but later they have become more important. And so now they can help me in other, you know, like if I'm doing a book in some other form and publishing. So, and they were all, again, it's all personal referrals. The agent I actually wound up with, and for the movie stuff, is all people, is like somebody as a friend, you know, and I think that's really important. I actually can't emphasize that enough.
One more question before we go into the lightning round. Yeah.
How much do you think that your career as a writer has been dependent on your skill as opposed to just like
Dumb luck
connections?
That's a good question. I would say the luck is what creates. It's like luck is like luck, or the connections plays a big role, right? But if you then can't really deliver, you know, they don't really mean that much. So they sort of facilitate, you know, your abilities, hopefully. But I would say it's fairly significant. I mean, I have thought about it. It is all due to Dave Eggers, for example, in my case, and John Hodgman, who is also another McSweeneys person. So basically from, like, in other words, like I could trace back every single thing. Like, that's how I started. I only got into Lawrence Weschler's class. He wouldn't let people in, and I said I would audit. He's like, maybe. And I was like, well, I published something in McSweeneys. And he's like, okay. You know? And then he was the one that sent me in, you know, and then like for the movie stuff, it happened that John Hodgman, who now is, you know, like, the Apple guy and on the Daily Show and stuff, but at the time he was a book agent, and wrote for McSweeneys and stuff. And his colleague then went into the movie agenting side, and then she became my agent. And then I don't know, it is kind of some of that. But that said, then there's people that like, I think they have connections, and then they don't have much talent, and then somehow they seem to do fine too. But what doesn't work, I think, is like, what is rarer is like if you don't, I mean, of course, like if you're just a supreme talent, there's nothing, I wouldn't take away from that at all. But I think it is hard to exploit it properly unless you kind of got to operate a little bit.
Right.
I hope that's not too cynical.
Oh, sorry. You need to step on your last line.
No.
It's probably the most important one. So this is the lightning round, and this is why I'm here. My name is Lloyd King, and the University of Chicago has hired me to be your career advisor in the arts. It's not an oxymoronic position. You can actually have careers in the arts. Whether or not you make money is something else. But I can help you with that, with both things. So those lightning round are all career in the arts questions. I'm going to see if I can do 10 questions in 10 minutes. So we just have to be fast. We
Okay, all right.
like a team. It's like
Let's do it. Okay. Yeah.
So first it's like, okay.
Things that taste like cherries.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
They're random, so they're not anywhere, but they just as they come up. All right, so benefits, like somebody just was telling me, oh, well, you got benefits, because I work here for the university.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you handle that?
I pay out the ass through my health insurance.
Yeah. Right.
That's what you mean, right?
Yeah, that's
okay.
what I mean. All right, two. Is the pay the same when you get a story killed? Like you said, you wrote the story for something?
Well, sometimes I've gotten a couple like counting error in your favor, but for the most part, there's a kill fee, 25%, industry standard. But then you can negotiate specifically. I think mine is higher, but also I've never really had that GQ story was I actually got accidentally paid for the whole thing.
Oh, but it must this is an extra question. It must hurt your soul to have a story to kill, and ultimately your pocketbook because it's not the lottery. It's not going to get picked up and made into a movie. Or
it's hard to then often it is hard to sell it elsewhere because people are like, oh, there's something wrong with it now.
Right. If you're like somebody here and you're just starting out, or say I'm just starting out, like do I go and pitch a story to the Village Voice or LA Weekly, or and would they take me seriously, because I'm just out of college, or do I write the story first and then email it to them and say publish me?
Well, if you have a really good pitch, I would say you can go ahead and send the pitch. It can't hurt. The worst thing that happens is they say no. And then if they say no, then you can also always go write it. And if it's good, people will run it. Especially if you know what the voice of that publication is, and you're giving them something that they're going to like.
And then, are you taking all these photos? Like, is that necessary? Do I'm writing stories? I have to go around and take pictures of all my people?
I like to take some photos, but only actually for my own reference. Because then later, when you're trying to write about it, you could be like, oh, there was this blue thing over here. So they don't wind up getting used in the publication. I mean, all the big publications send a fancy photographer down who has lights and stuff.
Cool. That's definitely necessary. All right, and then so I don't know. I mean, this is hard to think about. Say over a year, how many hours a week do you work on average? I mean, I know I've worked 40-hour-a-week jobs. I've worked 80-hour-a-week jobs. I've worked 20-hour-a-week jobs. What does it take to do it? Hour?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think, as freelance, if you're full-time freelance, it's hard to, I don't know, you guys, it's a little bit like being a student where you're like, I have to make myself do some work, right? Because you don't actually have to do anything. I guess you got to show up for class, but really you don't. But you know what I mean? You don't actually have to be at work at 9, so it's hard to force yourself to work. So that's good because then, it's not good because you can procrastinate, but it's good. I like having a flexible schedule where I wake up a little bit later and kind of I don't know, sit in the backyard for a while before anything happens. But then the problem is for me that then you wind up working always. So then at 10 o'clock at night, you're like, oh, I've thought of something. And so your work day never ends. So I kind of feel like I'm always working. And I also feel like I have a pretty relaxed, I feel like I should be working more.
That sounds about right. And then, so advice about, if I'm just starting out, what should I do? That's the first part of the question. The second part, of course, is...
What should you do?
Yeah, what should I do? What should I not do? You can pick
of any... In what specific...
What sort of advice do you have for somebody who's just starting out?
I would say... Oh, God. That is a good question. I would have said something really specific a few years ago, which is start with your local alt weekly, because those places, they're fat. They in terms of they have to publish every week. They need actually stories all the time, and you can get started writing that way. And they are wide open. And in terms of style, you can do whatever you want, and you can do all this different sections, film, features, covers, whatever. But now those publications are all shitty and are dying. So that is not the best place. And also there's community around those places. It's kind of cool to see people that are ahead of you is a little bit different now to get started. I actually have no fucking idea. I'm going to say that. I'm gonna say I don't know.
Yeah. And is there like something though, a piece of crap that I should avoid stepping in? Like don't do that.
I would say never. If somebody, you get wronged, by editors who don't get back to you and stuff, it's really tempting to be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And just send like mad emails. Don't ever do it. I've only done it once, and it haunts me to this day. But yeah, seriously, like that's the thing, it's very tempting. Like even now, you see, I'm still mad at Jim Nelson. But if I saw him, I would be very friendly.
How long do you spend with these superheroes?
I spent like 2 months with Master Legend, like on and off. I mean, like I spent like a couple weeks there, and then I would be on the phone with him and talking to him, and then I went and I interviewed all these other ones. There's like 10 or 12 at that time. Now there's more, sadly, because my article like became like viral and convinced a lot of troubled people to like go out and put on costumes, actually, for real. And or people that wanted to help people. I mean, actually, I had to say, like, let me just click, Master Legend, this is actually really good. Okay, this is really important. Master Legend is clearly silly, and it's funny about it, but like, I totally believe in his story, and that's why I chose to write about him. I interviewed all these other dudes who were either like totally deranged or superhero kind of like doesn't really do that much, but he kind of has the trappings of superhero. Master Legend's like, I totally have my life dedicated to this, and I ascertained that it was real in some way. I talked to the police, and they're like, yeah, he fought crime, and he did this, this, and this, and he told me that he had saved this kid from being stabbed, and I talked to the mom, and she's like, yeah, Master Legend saved Kenny from being stabbed, and all that stuff. So, you kind of, when you spend enough time with somebody, even when it's silly on the surface, you start to kind of get very sympathetic towards them, and I think that that's a very important approach to doing this kind of journalism, because you have to like love your subjects, as I do.